it's time for me to come clean. And to be honest with you, Exhaustion is my favorite mechanic in D&D. For us DMs, it's a great mechanic and it can be a lot of fun, but for a lot of players, it's nearly their worst nightmare. It's a mechanic that can kill you really quickly and has very terrible side effects. You go from level 2 where you lose half of your speed all the way up to being dead by level 7. It can be kinda tricky to navigate, but it's something that when I've incorporated in my games, it's been a lot of fun. So let's talk about some of the ways where I've used Exhaustion, so maybe you can get some ideas on how you could use it in a fun way in your campaign. So probably my favorite way I've used Exhaustion so far has been in one of my survival campaigns that I run. So my players start out deep in the tundra. They're in this survival campaign and they just got to the nearest city. They are here in this settlement, they're in a frozen tundra, really desperate, and they're about to head 3 weeks into a settlement to fight some spirit beasts in the region. They're all out of their supplies, so they decide to head to the local market and pick up some food. Pretty standard stuff. But they start to look around for some rations, but they're all sold out. All they can find is jerkied boar meat, hare, and even venison. But other than that, it's really sparse and they can't really take any produce with them because it won't last. So they're really concerned because these rations are incredibly expensive. They're 4 gold per player per day, and that gets to be a little pricey. They're concerned they won't have the money to buy it. And then all of a sudden the ranger stumbles upon this metaphorical gold mine. He finds an entire box of mistletoe. And for those who are into D&D, you'll know what spell they're thinking of. He thinks he's found a gold mine because now they can use Goodberry, which they haven't been able to use all campaign long. The ranger finds an entire barrel for just 1 copper, 14 weeks worth of food. The shop owner explains to them that because the berries are completely poisonous, no one really uses them for anything. They kind of just got brought in on accident, and so he's just left them sitting there to this point. So they grab them, completely ecstatic that they found a way to fix their food shortage. They begin to head in. They're 6 days into their travel to the next village. It's another 14 days for them. They've traveled 15 miles, and all of a sudden, they feel themselves beginning to feel heavier. They feel like they can't do anything. It's way back, and they really are finding themselves struggling to push forward through the snowstorm. They begin to panic, and they try to rush back to the town, but they only make it 10 miles, and each time they're going slower and slower. So, with only a few days of eating the good berries, they've begun to rack up exhaustion points, and because of this, they are terrified as to the results. They're gonna have to go out and hunt, and because of this, they go and they push into the wilderness to find some food so that they can actually make it back to the town, and in doing so, they found the spirit beast that they were looking for. So I used this exhaustion and the urgency of them having to find a way to get back, but going slower and not really being able to make it back on just Goodberry, and also still have to find the thing in the area that they're looking for. To them, it seemed like a coincidence, but because they had to stop and look for things, they found the spirit beast they were looking for. It was a great storytelling element, and in my game specifically, I think it was a great way to balance Goodberry. Goodberry's usually a really big problem, and I didn't want to just tell my players no to it, but if they ate it for multiple days in a row, it would slowly give them exhaustion. That was something that was really scary to my players and added a lot of urgency. They had to find a better way to operate. Otherwise, they weren't going to make it back to the town and they were going to die in the tundra. I thought that this was probably my best use of exhaustion, and it's something I intend to use in the future because I think it's a lot of fun. It adds a lot of urgency, especially when rations become low, and you can kind of adjust how much they need to use Goodberry in your story. It can make combat very interesting. Now, if you've seen my video on turning the Elder Dinos from Magic the Gathering into creatures for D&D, you'll know I love to use status effects as a source of damage, and Exhaustion's really no different. I've done this a couple of times, and I've had very mixed success with it. So the first time that I tried to do it, I used leeches. I thought that they were going to be a great way of doing it. These super tiny monsters that would just hide in the water, and when they would bite attack, they have the option to hang on. If they hung on to a player, that player had to make a DC 10 check. And if they didn't pass the DC 10 con check with disadvantage, they would actually end up taking a point of exhaustion. This was really scary in some situations because there could be tons of them. That being said, the thing I really didn't account for that I would say made this monster kind of a flop was the fact that because they were tiny monsters, my players just ended up putting a bunch of them in jars and bringing them with them on encounters. And even though I wouldn't let them just survive in the jar forever, it still led to some problems in certain combats. I thought it was a really fun idea, so I decided to revisit it later, and I was looking for a creature that I could use it on where exhaustion made sense, and the one that I came up with actually is a real-world creature. My players were on a tropical island, and they were looking for a treasure chest. They were playing as pirates, and what they ended up finding was a Komodo dragon. I'm a big reptile person. I think Komodo dragons are awesome, and their poison's really interesting because in D&D, poison's just one static effect, and the venom that Komodo dragons have is kind of weird because they'll bite their prey once and let it run away, and then they'll just follow it after. So I was like, what is going to be fitting for this animal? Well, whenever they got a bite attack off successfully on a player, they would actually give them a point of exhaustion. And this was really fun because I gave it a lot of health, made it pretty tanky, and made it just a very patient monster, and there were just tons of them on the island. So they kind of just tracked my players throughout the day, and they couldn't, being a medium-sized monster, chuck it in a backpack. Now, before somebody mentions this, I had a ranger in that game, and I even let him have it as a pet. And honestly, even with it being a pet, I didn't find it being super oppressive in the game because there weren't very many of them. If it was against a boss, I mean, 7 rounds is a long time for it to be going after something, and that's if it didn't make any saves. I think on that one I ended up doing like a DC 8 save, and it worked out pretty well. It was a lot of fun, and it still made the encounters pretty scary, especially for my players who like to power game. And because they like to power game, sometimes fighting doesn't feel as rewarding for them. So I think adding exhaustion into my damage made a lot of the encounters feel a lot more deadly, especially in the later levels. And if you want to use either of these monsters, feel free to take inspiration from them. I'll have their stat blocks linked down below, and I think there's a lot of use for exhaustion as a mechanic in D&D. So make sure you check it out and kind of just play with it because it's really fun. It's my personal favorite mechanic and status effect. All right, have a great rest of your day, and remember, stay inspired.